A Hell's Angel noticed, bruises on the lips of his cook. Then, what he did next shocked everyone. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Main Street as Bear turned the key in the diner's front door. The familiar jingle of bells welcomed him into the cozy space he'd called home for the past decade. The aroma of yesterday's coffee and home-style cooking still lingered in the air, a comforting reminder of countless meals served and stories shared. Bear's massive frame moved with surprising grace as he flicked on the lights, illuminating the checker-tiled floor and red vinyl booths. His weathered hands, covered in faded tattoos that told stories of his wilder days, automatically went through the morning routine, starting the coffee makers, firing up the grills, and checking the prep stations. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. The quiet of early morning was his favorite time. Before the clatter of plates and murmur of conversation filled the air, Bear could appreciate the peace he'd found here. So different from his tumultuous past with the Hell's Angels. The diner represented everything good that had come after: redemption, community, and family. One by one, his staff began trickling in. First was Joe, the elderly dishwasher who'd never missed a day of work in 5 years. Then came Sarah, the bright-eyed teenage waitress who worked weekends to save for college. Bear greeted them both with a warm smile and a gentle nod, his imposing presence softened by the genuine affection he held for his employees. The morning light streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the counter as Bear wiped it down with practiced strokes. The chrome coffee urns gleamed, and the display case waited empty for the day's pies and cakes. Everything was falling into its usual place, yet something felt off. He heard the back door open and close softly, Emma's signature arrival. She always came in through the kitchen, usually humming some quiet tune as she tied on her apron and began prep work for the morning rush. But today, the humming was absent. The silence felt wrong, like a missing note in a familiar song. Bear looked up as Emma emerged from the kitchen, and his heart dropped. She wore her usual uniform, crisp white shirt, comfortable black pants, sensible shoes, but something was different. Her normally bright face seemed drawn, and despite her attempt at a smile, Bear's keen eyes caught the slight swelling around her lips, poorly concealed by makeup. The bruising was subtle. Someone less observant might have missed it. But to Bear, it stood out like a neon sign. His protective instincts flared immediately, a remnant of his past life that he'd never quite shed. But years of growth had taught him to temper his reactions, to think before acting. "Morning, Bear," Emma said, her voice carrying its usual warmth, though slightly muted. She busied herself with checking the coffee stations, her movements precise but somehow more rigid than usual. Bear watched as she worked, noting how she kept her face slightly turned away from him. The morning light caught her profile, making the discoloration around her mouth more apparent. His fingers tightened unconsciously around the rag he held, but he forced them to relax. Years of running the diner had taught him when to push and when to wait. This moment called for patience. Emma was more than just an employee. She was family, and family needed space sometimes, needed to feel safe enough to open up on their own terms. So Bear simply nodded back, his voice gentle as he replied, "Morning, Emma." He continued his morning routine, but his attention remained fixed on his cook, watching and waiting for the right moment to broach the subject of those telling bruises. The morning rush came and went like a whirlwind of coffee cups and breakfast plates. Bear kept one eye on the dining room and another on Emma as she worked her magic in the kitchen. Her movements were efficient as always, but he noticed how she flinched whenever the kitchen door swung open too quickly, how she seemed to shrink into herself when male customers approached the pass-through window. The lunch crowd filled every red vinyl booth and chrome-edged counter seat. Burgers sizzled on the grill, and the air grew thick with the aroma of fresh-cut fries and homemade soup. Through it all, Emma stayed focused on her work, her face a mask of concentration that didn't quite hide her unease. As the last lunch customers filtered out, leaving only the familiar quiet of mid-afternoon, Bear knew it was time. He watched Emma wiping down her station, her shoulders tense as she scrubbed at an already clean spot on the stainless steel counter. "Emma?" Bear called softly, his large frame filling the kitchen doorway. "Got a minute?" She looked up, then quickly away, her hands still moving mechanically with the cleaning cloth. "Sure, Bear. What's up?" Bear stepped fully into the kitchen, letting the door swing shut behind him. He leaned against one of the prep tables, trying to make his massive presence less intimidating. "I noticed something this morning," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "The bruises on your face. They're new." Emma's movements stilled. The cloth in her hand twisted as she gripped it tighter. "It's nothing," she said quickly. I bumped into a cabinet door at home." "Emma." Bear's voice was soft but firm. "I've known you for years. You're family to me. Please don't lie." The kitchen fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Emma's shoulders slumped slightly, and she still wouldn't meet Bear's eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It was Tom McAllister. Bear felt his blood run cold. Tom McAllister was a regular, always sitting in booth 7, always ordering the same black coffee and club sandwich. He was also one of the town's most prominent businessmen. "He's been," Emma continued, her voice shaking slightly. "He's been making comments for weeks now, asking me out. I kept saying no, trying to be polite about it. But yesterday—" She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "Yesterday, he caught me in the parking lot after my shift. He grabbed my arm, said I was being stuck up. When I pulled away, Her hand went unconsciously to her bruised lips. Bear's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with tension. The old familiar rage from his Hell's Angels days surged through him, the urge to find Tom McAllister and show him exactly what happened to men who hurt women. Emma must have seen something change in his expression because she stepped forward quickly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Please, Bear," she pleaded, finally meeting his eyes. "Don't do anything. He's powerful in this town. He could make trouble for all of us. I can handle it. I need to figure out how." Bear took a deep breath, forcing his fingers to uncurl. "Emma, you shouldn't have to handle this alone. What he did, it's assault. We could go to the police." "No," Emma said firmly, though her voice trembled. "Please, Bear, promise me you won't do anything rash. Promise me you'll let me handle this my way." Bear looked down at Emma's face, saw the fear and determination in her eyes. It took every ounce of self-control he possessed to nod slowly. "I'll think it over," he said, though his jaw remained tight with barely contained anger. "But Emma, this isn't right, and it's not over." The morning sunlight streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the empty booths. Bear sat at the counter, his large hands wrapped around a coffee mug that looked tiny in his grip. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving behind the lingering scent of bacon and maple syrup. His mind wandered back to a time he tried hard to forget. 20 years ago, he would have handled things differently. The memory of a rain-soaked night in '95 surfaced, his fists connecting with flesh, the sound of breaking bones, the satisfaction of violent revenge. Back then, wearing his Hell's Angels colors, he'd believed that every problem could be solved with his fists. Bear rubbed his beard, studying his reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. The man staring back at him wasn't that angry young biker anymore. His tattoos had faded, like the memories of his violent past. but they were still there, reminding him of who he used to be. He'd learned the hard way that violence only bred more violence. The coffee in his mug had gone cold. He'd promised Emma he would think things through, and he had. The old bear would have waited for Tom McAllister in a dark parking lot. The new bear knew better. But doing nothing wasn't the answer either. The day dragged on, the usual rhythm of the diner failing to distract him from his concerns. He watched Emma work, noticed how she kept glancing nervously at the door every time it opened. When Tom McAllister didn't show up for his usual lunch, Bear saw Emma's shoulders relax slightly, though the tension never fully left her face. As the sun began to set and the dinner crowd thinned out, Bear found Emma sitting alone in the back booth of the empty diner. Her apron was folded neatly beside her, and she was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. The sight of her crying made his heart ache. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. Emma quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Of course not," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. Bear slid into the booth across from her, his bulk making the vinyl seat creak. He waited patiently, giving her time to find her words. "I should have told you sooner," Emma finally said, twisting the damp napkin in her hands. "But I've gotten so used to hiding things." She took a shaky breath. "My ex-husband, he was like Tom. It started small, controlling behavior, harsh words. Then came the pushes, the slaps." Her voice cracked. "I spent 3 years hiding bruises under makeup, making excuses about being clumsy." Bear's hands clenched under the table, but he kept his voice steady. "How did you get out?" "One night, he went too far. I grabbed Max and ran. We've been running ever since." Emma's tears fell freely now. "I thought we were finally safe here. I thought I could start over. But now with Tom..." She shook her head. "I can't run again, Bear. Max is settled in school. He has friends here. This is our home." Bear reached across the table, his large hand gently covering Emma's trembling ones. "Listen to me, Emma. You don't have to run anymore. We'll figure this out together. Find a way to handle Tom that doesn't put you or Max in danger." He squeezed her hands softly. "I promise you, we'll find a solution. You're not alone in this anymore." The lunch rush was in full swing at Bear's diner. The clinking of plates and the hum of conversation filled the air as Emma moved efficiently through the kitchen, preparing orders with practiced ease. Bear stood behind the counter, wiping glasses and keeping a watchful eye on the bustling dining room. The bell above the door chimed, and Tom McAllister strode in, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the modest diner. His polished shoes clicked against the worn linoleum floor as he made his way to the counter. Bear's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure, remembering his promise to Emma. "Good afternoon, Emma," Tom called out, his voice carrying over the kitchen noise. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he watched her through the service window. Emma's shoulders tensed, but she kept working, giving only a slight nod in response. Bear moved closer to the kitchen window, positioning himself between Tom and Emma's line of sight. "What can I get you today, Mr. McAllister?" His voice was neutral, professional, but his eyes were hard as steel. Tom's smirk widened as he settled onto a counter stool, deliberately ignoring Bear's question. "The lunch special looks good today, Emma. Your cooking always makes my day better." The compliment carried an undertone that made Bear's fists clench beneath the counter. Emma kept her head down, focused on plating an order of meatloaf. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the green beans, but her voice remained steady. "Sarah will take your order, Mr. McAllister. I'm busy in the kitchen." Tom's expression flickered with irritation, but he quickly masked it with another smooth smile. "Come now, Emma. We're all friends here, aren't we?" He leaned forward, his elbows on the counter. No need to be so formal. Bear grabbed a menu and placed it firmly in front of Tom, the sharp snap of laminated plastic against the counter making several nearby customers jump. Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Sarah will be right with you. The two men locked eyes for a moment. Tom's facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of anger before he recovered his composure. He picked up the menu with deliberate slowness, making a show of studying it. In the kitchen, Emma moved with mechanical precision, but Bear could see the tension in every line of her body. She was working too fast, her movements sharp and jerky. A pot clattered loudly as she set it down with more force than necessary. Tom placed his order with Sarah, but his eyes kept drifting to the kitchen window. He sat at the counter, sipping his coffee with exaggerated patience, watching Emma work. The sight of him made Bear's protective instincts roar to life, but he forced himself to stay put, remembering Emma's pleading eyes when she'd asked him not to intervene. The minutes crawled by as Tom lingered over his lunch. He made small talk with other customers, playing the role of the friendly local businessman, but his gaze constantly returned to Emma. Each time he looked her way, Bear noticed Emma's movements becoming more rigid, more controlled, as if she was fighting to hold herself together. Bear moved around the diner, refilling coffee cups and clearing tables, but he never strayed too far from the counter. He watched as Tom took his time with his meal, cutting each bite with precise movements, his eyes following Emma's every move. The predatory nature of his attention made Bear's stomach turn. Tom's behavior was calculated, Bear realized. He wasn't just having lunch, he was sending a message. Each minute he spent watching Emma was a reminder of his presence, his power, his ability to make her uncomfortable in what should have been her safe space. As the bell chimed with Tom's departure, the tension in the diner seemed to lift. Bear watched through the window as Tom's expensive car pulled away, then turned his attention to Emma. She stood in the kitchen, methodically wiping down the same spot on the counter over and over, her movements mechanical. "Emma," Bear called softly, stepping into the kitchen. "We need to talk about this." She didn't look up, just kept scrubbing at the already clean surface. "There's nothing to talk about, Bear." "Nothing to talk about?" Bear's voice was gentle but firm. "He sat there for an hour watching you like a hawk. That's not right?" He moved closer, careful to give her space. "Let me handle this. One conversation with him. That's all it would take." Emma's hand stilled on the counter. "You mean one fight?" She finally looked up at him, her eyes tired but determined. "I know that look in your eyes, Bear. I've seen it before." "He needs to be stopped," Bear insisted, running a hand through his beard in frustration. "I can make sure he never bothers you again." "The way you used to handle things with the angels?" Emma's words were quiet but sharp. "Is that what you're suggesting?" Bear's shoulders slumped. She'd hit a nerve, and they both knew it. "That's not fair, Emma. I'm not that person anymore." "Then don't ask me to let you become him again." Emma set down her cleaning cloth and turned to face him fully. "Violence doesn't solve anything. It just creates more pain, more problems." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've lived through enough of that to know." Bear leaned against the wall, his imposing frame somehow looking smaller. "I can't just stand by and watch him hurt you." "You think I don't know what it would cost you?" Emma's eyes welled with tears. "You've worked so hard to build this life, to become someone different. I won't be the reason you throw that away." "But..." "No, Bear." Emma stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I've seen what happens when good men let anger take control. I won't watch you go down that path. Not for me." Bear looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. The protective instinct warred with the wisdom of her words. You shouldn't have to face him alone. Maybe not, Emma agreed softly. But I won't let you sacrifice your peace for my problems. I've made my choice. Bear straightened up, conflict evident in every line of his face. He wanted to argue more, to convince her that he could handle this without losing control. But the trust in her eyes stopped him. She believed in the man he'd become, even if he wasn't sure of that man himself. Promise me you'll tell me if things get worse, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Emma nodded, dropping her hand from his arm. I promise. Bear turned and walked away, each step feeling like a betrayal of his instincts. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with unspoken words. Behind him, Emma watched him go, relief mingling with guilt in her chest. She knew what it cost him to walk away, to respect her wishes when every fiber of his being wanted to fight. She turned back to the counter, picking up her cleaning cloth again, trying to ignore the weight of facing Tom's intimidation alone. The neon lights of Murphy's bar cast a soft red glow across Bear's face as he sat at the corner table. His fingers traced the condensation on his glass of club soda, his thoughts still tangled in the day's events. Jack Peterson, his friend of 20 years, settled into the chair across from him, his weathered face creased with concern. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, old friend, Jack said, taking a sip of his beer. The bar's usual Friday night crowd created a comfortable backdrop of chatter and clinking glasses. Bear sighed heavily. It's Emma. She's in trouble, Jack. Real trouble. The cook at your diner? Sweet lady with the kid? Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping. What kind of trouble? Bear's jaw clenched as he explained about Tom McAllister, the Bruises, and Emma's refusal to let him intervene. His massive hands gripped the glass tighter with each detail. Back in the day, this wouldn't even be a discussion, Bear growled. I'd have handled it already. Jack nodded slowly, understanding flickering across his face. Yeah, and we both know where that path leads. He set his beer down. Remember that situation at the women's shelter I told you about? Bear looked up, curiosity replacing some of the anger in his eyes. Had this woman, Sandra, coming in regular. Husband was beating her, Jack continued, his voice steady. I wanted to go after him myself, but you know what actually helped? Getting her connected with people who could really make a difference. Lawyers, counselors, support groups. This is different, Bear protested. Emma won't even let me. Is it different? Jack interrupted gently. Listen, I've known you since your Angels days. You're not that guy anymore, and that's a good thing. Violence might feel good in the moment, but it never really solves anything. Bear ran a hand through his beard, frustration evident in every movement. So, what am I supposed to do? Just watch while he hurts her? No, Jack replied firmly. You support her. You be there. You help her find real solutions. He paused, taking another sip of beer. Remember what you always say about your diner? About making it a safe place? Bear nodded slowly. Well, maybe that's what Emma needs most right now. Not a fighter, but a safe place. Someone who shows her there's another way. The words hung between them as Bear absorbed their meaning. The distant jukebox played an old country song, filling the thoughtful silence. Later that night, Bear pulled up to the diner. The parking lot was empty except for Emma's old Honda. Through the window, he could see her moving around inside, finishing the closing routine she'd done hundreds of times before. He found her counting the register, her movements precise and familiar. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled, offering a tired smile. I've been thinking, Bear said, his voice rough with emotion. About everything. Emma's hands stilled on the bills she was counting. "Bear, just listen," he said softly. "I know you don't want me to fight, and maybe you're right about that. But I can't just stand by and do nothing while you're hurting." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the same war between fear and hope he'd been fighting all day. Emma's shoulders tensed, but she didn't look away. "I don't have all the answers yet," Bear continued, his massive frame seeming to deflate slightly. "But I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever you decide, you're not alone in this." The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Bear watched from behind the counter as Emma moved between tables, her usual graceful efficiency replaced by something slower, more hesitant. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her smile seemed forced as she took orders from the regular breakfast crowd. "Order up," Maria, the other cook, called out. Emma flinched at the sudden noise, nearly dropping her coffee pot. Bear's chest tightened as he watched her steady herself against a nearby table. "I've got this one," Bear said, stepping in to take the plates from Maria. He delivered them to table 6, keeping one eye on Emma as she disappeared into the kitchen. Through the service window, he could see her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the steel prep table. The breakfast rush continued, a blur of pancakes, eggs, and coffee refills. Emma went through the motions, but Bear noticed how she kept glancing at the door every time it chimed. Each time, her shoulders would relax slightly when it wasn't Tom walking in. By mid-morning, the crowd had thinned out. Bear was wiping down the counter when he heard the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. He found Emma kneeling on the floor, trying to gather the shards of a broken coffee mug with shaking hands. "Let me help with that," Bear said softly, reaching for the broom and dustpan. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, her voice thick. "I don't know what's wrong with me today. I can't seem to—" She trailed off, staring at her trembling fingers. "When's the last time you got some real sleep?" Bear asked, sweeping up the broken pieces. Emma shook her head, pushing herself to her feet. "I'm fine. I just need to focus on work." But she wasn't fine. Throughout the morning, Bear watched her drop things, mix up orders, and jump at small noises. When the lunch crowd started trickling in, he made a decision. "Take a break," he told her firmly, guiding her toward his office in the back. "Just 15 minutes. To his surprise, she didn't argue. In his small office, Emma sank into the worn leather chair, her exhaustion finally showing through completely. Bear closed the door, giving them privacy from the bustling diner beyond. "Talk to me," he said, pulling up a folding chair across from her. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "He called me last night," she admitted. 3 times. I didn't answer, but he left messages." She wrapped her arms around herself. He said he knows where Max's school is, that he sees him playing at recess sometimes." Bear's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "Has he threatened Max directly?" "Not exactly, but—" Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said I should think about what I have to lose, that if I tell anyone else about what happened, he could make things very difficult for me." Her voice cracked. "I can't lose my job, Bear. I can't risk Max's safety. He's all I have." The fear in her voice made Bear's heart ache. This wasn't just about Bruises anymore. Tom was escalating, using Emma's love for her son as a weapon against her. The weight of the situation settled over Bear like a heavy blanket as he watched Emma try to compose herself, knowing that her tears were just the surface of a much deeper terror. The dawn painted the sky in shades of purple and orange as Bear pulled into the diner's parking lot. His old pickup truck's headlights swept across the front windows, illuminating a lone figure sitting at the counter inside. Bear's muscles tensed as he recognized Tom McAllister's expensive suit and perfectly styled hair through the glass. Bear took a deep breath, remembering his promise to Emma. His large hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. After a moment, he grabbed his keys and stepped out into the cool morning air. The bell above the door chimed as Bear entered. Tom swiveled on his stool, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Bear," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Hope you don't mind. Found the door unlocked." Bear knew that was a lie. He always double-checked the locks himself every night. Tom must have gotten a copy of the key somehow. The thought made his skin crawl. "We're not open yet," Bear said, his voice deliberately calm as he moved behind the counter. He flicked on the lights and started the coffee maker, its familiar gurgling filling the uncomfortable silence. "Oh, I know," Tom replied, straightening his silk tie. "Thought we could have a chat, just us boys." He drummed his manicured fingers on the counter, the sound echoing in the empty diner. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Bear said nothing, focusing on his opening routine. He pulled out fresh filters, measured the coffee grounds, and checked the cream levels in the dispensers. His movements were precise, controlled, masking the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You know," Tom continued, seemingly unbothered by Bear's silence, "I've been coming to this place for what, 5 years now?" He looked around the diner with an appraising eye. "Always loved the home-style cooking, especially Emma's. That woman has quite a talent." Bear's hand tightened around the coffee pot he was holding. The casual way Tom said Emma's name made his blood boil, but he kept his face neutral as he poured the fresh coffee into a mug. "Speaking of Emma," Tom said, accepting the coffee with a nod, "she seems a bit distracted lately. Hope everything's all right with her." His tone was light, but there was an edge to his words, a subtle threat that hung in the air between them. Bear set the pot down with careful precision, his massive frame casting a shadow over Tom's smaller figure. He didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the tattoos on his forearms, reminders of his past life, a life he'd left behind but hadn't forgotten. Tom stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. "Just concerned about her, you know, as a regular customer." He took a sip, watching Bear over the rim of his cup. "It would be a shame if anything were to disrupt her life here." Bear continued his morning preparations, his mind working beneath his stoic exterior. He pulled out fresh napkins, arranged condiment bottles, and checked the salt shakers, all while processing Tom's thinly veiled threats. With each passing moment, the beginnings of a plan started taking shape in his mind. Not one of violence, but something else entirely. Tom sat there, sipping his coffee, filling the air with meaningless small talk about the weather, local politics, and his business ventures. But Bear heard the underlying message in every word. A warning, a challenge, a test to see how far he could push. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of McAllister Industries as Bear pulled up in his pickup truck. The modern glass building stood in stark contrast to his weathered vehicle, much like how Bear himself, with his tattoos and motorcycle boots, seemed out of place among the well-dressed office workers hurrying past. Bear's morning encounter with Tom had only strengthened his resolve. He needed to do something, anything, to protect Emma. The memory of her bruises fueled each step as he walked toward the building's entrance. The lobby was cool and quiet, with polished marble floors that echoed under his heavy footsteps. A young receptionist looked up, her eyes widening slightly at his appearance. Before she could speak, a woman's voice called out from near the elevators, "Mr. Callahan?" Bear turned to find Claire McAllister standing there, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer outfit a stark reminder of the world Tom inhabited. She looked smaller than he remembered from her visits to the diner, more fragile somehow. "Mrs. McAllister?" Bear nodded, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. Claire glanced around nervously before approaching him. "Tom's not here," she said quietly. "But I need to speak with you. Please." She led him to a small courtyard behind the building, away from prying eyes. The space was beautifully landscaped, but felt sterile, like everything else associated with Tom McAllister. "I know why you're here," Claire said, wringing her hands. "It's about Emma Collins, isn't it?" Bear studied her face carefully. "You know about that?" Claire's shoulders slumped as she sat on a concrete bench. "I know everything." Her voice trembled slightly. "The drinking, the affair with his secretary, the way he's been acting toward Emma." She looked up at Bear, her eyes glistening. "I've seen the way he looks at her at the diner, the same way he used to look at me before." She trailed off, but Bear could fill in the blanks. He remained standing, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. "Tom's not well," Claire continued, her words coming faster now. "He's been spiraling ever since the affair became public. The drinking's gotten worse, and his temper." She shuddered. "I've tried to talk to him, but he won't listen. He just gets angrier." Bear's fists clenched involuntarily. "Has he hurt you?" Claire's silence was answer enough. She wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. "I'm not here about me. I'm worried about Emma. The way he's been lately. I'm afraid he'll do something terrible." She stood up suddenly, grabbing Bear's arm with surprising strength. "Please, you have to help. I can't stop him myself. I've tried, but I'm too scared. But he respects you, in his way. Maybe you can reach him before it's too late." Bear stood there, processing this unexpected turn of events. The wife of his enemy was asking for his help, confirming his worst fears about Tom, while adding new layers of complexity to an already complicated situation. Claire's grip on his arm tightened. "Please," she whispered. "I don't know who else to turn to. Help me find a way to stop him." Bear looked down at this frightened woman, feeling the weight of her desperate plea. The situation with Tom McAllister had just become far more complicated than he'd imagined. Bear sat across from Claire at a quiet coffee shop several blocks from the diner. The distance was intentional. He didn't want Tom's wife anywhere near his territory right now. Claire stirred her untouched coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "He's not himself anymore," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since that girl from the office?" She swallowed hard. "Tom used to be different. Controlling, yes, but not like this. The affair broke something in him." Bear remained silent, his massive frame making the cafe chair look like doll furniture. He waited for her to continue. "The drinking started right after she left him," Claire went on. "First it was just at night, then during lunch, and now—" She shook her head. "He's angry all the time. Everything sets him off. When he started going to your diner more often, I knew why. The way he looks at Emma—" Her voice cracked. "Has he hurt you?" Bear asked again, his voice gentle despite his imposing presence. Claire's eyes darted away. "Not physically, but the things he says, the way he acts. I'm scared for Emma. I've seen that look in his eyes before." Bear thanked Claire for her honesty and left the coffee shop, his mind heavy with this new information. He headed straight for the diner, where Emma was preparing for the dinner rush. "Emma?" he called softly, gesturing toward his office. "Got a minute?" She followed him, wiping her hands on her apron. The small office was cramped with both of them inside, but Emma seemed comfortable there. She'd spent many breaks in this room, sharing lunch with Bear while talking about their lives. "I spoke with Claire McAllister today," Bear said, watching Emma's reaction carefully. Emma's face paled slightly. What did she want? To warn me about Tom. Bear leaned against his desk. She's worried about what he might do. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture Bear had noticed more frequently lately. I just want this to end, she said quietly. No violence, no confrontation. I can't have Max seeing any of that. Emma, Bear started. No, Bear. Her voice was firm despite its softness. I've seen where violence leads. My ex-husband. She stopped, taking a deep breath. I won't let Max grow up thinking that's how problems get solved. There has to be another way. Bear watched her, feeling the familiar conflict rise in his chest. Here were two women, both afraid of the same man, both asking for his help, but in very different ways. Claire wanted intervention before Tom's behavior escalated further. Emma wanted peace, even if it meant enduring more of Tom's threatening presence. Later that evening, Bear sat alone in his diner after closing. The quiet felt heavy with the weight of his thoughts. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he contemplated his options. Every path seemed fraught with risk. If he confronted Tom directly, he might make things worse for both Emma and Claire. If he did nothing, he'd be failing to protect someone he cared about. The old Bear would have handled this with his fists, but he wasn't that man anymore. Emma's words about violence echoed in his mind, mixing with Claire's warnings about Tom's deteriorating state. He rubbed his face with his large hands, feeling the rough calluses against his skin. The solution had to be here somewhere, a way to honor Emma's wishes while ensuring her safety. But right now, it felt like trying to walk a tightrope in the dark. Bear pulled his old pickup truck into the parking lot of Murphy's hardware store. The faded red sign had been a town landmark for over 40 years, and if anyone knew the dirt on Tom McAllister, it would be Old Joe Murphy. The bell above the door chimed as Bear ducked his head to enter. Joe looked up from his crossword puzzle, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Well, if it ain't the reformed angel himself, he said with a warm smile. What brings you to my humble establishment? Bear ran his hand over his beard, considering his words carefully. Need some information, Joe, about Tom McAllister. Joe's smile faded. He set down his pencil and removed his glasses. That so? He glanced around the empty store before continuing. Why don't you come on back? Could use some help moving some boxes. In the stockroom, Joe pulled up 2 wooden crates for them to sit on. The smell of sawdust and metal filled the air. Tom wasn't always the big shot he is now, Joe began, his voice low. Used to work here, actually, back when his daddy was trying to teach him the value of honest work. Bear leaned forward, his massive frame making the crate creak. What happened? Started small, missing inventory, money that didn't add up. Joe shook his head. Then Sarah, my daughter, came to work here one summer. Tom, well, let's just say he didn't take rejection well. Started spreading rumors about her around town, nearly ruined her reputation before she left for college. Bear's jaw tightened. Why didn't you say anything? His father was powerful even then, made it clear that speaking up would be unwise. Joe's weathered hands twisted together. Ain't proud of staying quiet, but I had a family to think about. Bear spent the rest of the afternoon visiting other longtime residents. At the flower shop, Mrs. Peterson told him about Tom harassing her granddaughter until she quit her job at his company. At the local diner across town, the owner shared stories of Tom's aggressive behavior toward waitresses years ago. The pattern was clear. Tom had been building to this for years, his wealth and influence protecting him from consequences. Each person Bear spoke to painted the same picture. A man who used his power to intimidate and control others, especially women. Back at his diner, Bear sat in his office, staring at the notes he'd taken. Emma's situation wasn't isolated. It was part of a long history of abuse that Tom had gotten away with. The realization made his blood boil, but it also gave him an idea. He couldn't confront Tom with his fists, like the old bear would have done. But maybe he could confront him with the truth. All these people who'd stayed quiet out of fear, what if they didn't have to be afraid anymore? Bear pulled out his phone and started making calls. He needed to do this right. No violence, no threats, but no more silence either. Tom McAllister had hidden behind his power for too long, and Bear knew that the strongest weapon against such men wasn't physical force. It was bringing their actions into the light. He would need to be careful, strategic. Emma's safety came first, and he wouldn't do anything to put her at risk. But for the first time since this all began, Bear felt like he had a real plan, one that might actually work without compromising who he was trying to become. The evening sun cast long shadows through the diner windows as Bear flipped the open sign to closed. Emma was wiping down the last table, her movements slow and tired after a long shift. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the empty restaurant. "Emma," Bear called softly. "Got a minute?" She looked up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Sure, Bear. Everything okay?" He gestured toward his office at the back of the diner. "There's something I need to share with you." In the small office, Bear pulled out a chair for Emma before settling into his own. The desk between them was covered with handwritten notes and old newspaper clippings. Emma's eyes widened as she noticed Tom's name appearing multiple times. "What is all this?" she asked, picking up one of the papers. Bear leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on the desk. "I've been talking to people around town. About Tom." He paused, watching her reaction carefully. "You're not the first person he's hurt, Emma." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she read through the notes. "Joe Murphy's daughter? I remember her. She left town so suddenly." "Tom drove her away," Bear explained gently. "And there are others. Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter, 3 waitresses at Danny's diner across town." He took a deep breath. "These people have been carrying these stories for years, afraid to speak up because of Tom's influence." Emma set down the papers, her face pale. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," Bear admitted. "But now we do, and we have a choice to make." He reached across the desk, his large hand stopping short of touching hers. "These people are willing to come forward now, Emma. Together. No one has to stand alone anymore." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "But what if he—" "He can't hurt all of us," Bear interrupted firmly. "Not if we stand together, and I promise you, Emma, I'll be right beside you every step of the way." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You'd do that? Even after I told you not to get involved?" Bear's expression softened. "Family looks out for each other. And you're family now, whether you like it or not." A small smile crossed Emma's face. "You're not what people expect when they first see you, you know that?" "Story of my life," Bear chuckled. "But seriously, Emma, we can do this. The right way, through the proper channels. No violence, no revenge, just the truth coming to light." Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers on the desk. Finally, she looked up at Bear, her eyes clear and determined. "I'll press charges," she said, "but I need you to promise me something." "Name it." "Promise you'll be there. Through all of it. I don't think I can do this alone." Bear's face broke into a warm smile. "You have my word, and I never break my promises." Emma nodded, straightening in her chair. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders weren't hunched with fear. "Then let's do it. Let's stop him from hurting anyone else." Bear pulled out a fresh piece of paper. "First thing tomorrow, we'll go to the police station together." Tonight, let's write down everything that's happened. Every detail you can remember." Emma picked up a pen, her hand steady now. She felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. With Bear by her side, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this fight, she finally felt strong enough to face what was coming. The morning light streamed through the diner's windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Emma moved methodically behind the counter, filling coffee cups for the early regulars while Bear worked the grill. The usual breakfast chatter filled the air, but there was an undercurrent of tension. They both knew what they planned to do later that day at the police station. The bell above the door chimed, and the diner fell eerily quiet. Tom McAllister stood in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face flushed with anger. His eyes darted around until they found Emma, who had frozen in place, coffee pot still in hand. "Emma," he barked, striding toward the counter. "We need to talk, now." Bear's head snapped up from the grill, his shoulders tensing. He watched as Emma's hands began to shake, threatening to spill the hot coffee. "I said now," Tom repeated, his voice rising. Several customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bear moved with surprising speed for such a big man, positioning himself between Tom and the counter. "She's working, Tom, and you're causing a scene." Tom's face darkened. "This isn't any of your business, Callahan. This is between me and her." "Actually," Bear said calmly, though his eyes were hard, "anything that happens in my diner is my business, and right now you're disturbing my customers." Tom leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "I know what you two are planning. You really think anyone's going to believe her over me? I own half this town." "Times are changing, Tom," Bear replied, keeping his voice steady. "Maybe it's time you did too." Behind them, Emma had set down the coffee pot and straightened her spine. Her voice was quiet but clear when she spoke. "I have nothing to say to you, Tom. Please leave." Tom's laugh was ugly. "Oh, now you've found your voice? Well, sweetheart, we'll see how long that lasts when—" "That's enough," Bear interrupted, taking a step forward. His massive frame seemed to fill the space between them. "You heard the lady. Leave." The two men stared at each other, the air crackling with tension. Tom's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but Bear didn't move an inch. Finally, Tom's eyes flicked to the other customers, many of whom were watching the scene unfold with obvious interest. "This isn't over," Tom snarled, backing toward the door. "You think you're so tough, hiding behind this ex-biker trash? We'll see how that works out for you." He yanked the door open, the bell jangling violently. "You're both going to regret this," he called over his shoulder before storming out. Bear watched through the window as Tom got into his expensive car and peeled out of the parking lot. Only when the car was out of sight did he turn back to Emma, who was gripping the counter so hard her knuckles had turned white. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, though her face was pale. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done if—" Bear placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to find out. That's what family's for, remember?" Around them, the diner slowly returned to its normal breakfast rhythm, though several customers made a point of stopping by the counter to check on Emma before they left. She managed a small smile for each of them, drawing strength from their concern and Bear's steady presence beside her. The law office smelled of leather and old books. Emma sat stiffly in one of the high-backed chairs, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Bear's large frame seemed out of place in the elegant conference room, but he kept a reassuring presence beside her. Attorney David Parker spread several documents across his polished desk. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the morning light as he studied the photographs of Emma's injuries and the written statement she'd prepared. "Ms. Collins," he began, his voice gentle but professional. I want you to understand that cases like these can be challenging. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tom McAllister has considerable resources at his disposal. Emma's shoulders tensed. She'd expected this, but hearing it said out loud made her stomach churn. You mean because he's rich, he'll get away with it? That's not what I'm saying, Parker replied, leaning forward. But we need to be prepared. His legal team will try to discredit you. They might bring up your past, question your motives, even suggest you're making false accusations for financial gain. Bear shifted in his chair, which creaked under his weight. There are witnesses at the diner who've seen how he treats her. Parker nodded, making notes on his legal pad. That's good. We'll need statements from anyone willing to testify. But remember, many people might be hesitant to speak against someone like McAllister. Emma's voice trembled slightly. He told me no one would believe me. Her fingers twisted the tissue she held. Maybe he's right. Maybe this is a mistake. Emma, Bear said softly, turning to face her. Look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. You're not alone in this anymore. Every person at that diner knows what kind of man Tom really is. We're not going to let him intimidate you into silence. Parker cleared his throat. Mr. Callahan is right. While McAllister's wealth and connections make this more difficult, they don't make him untouchable. He pulled out another document. We have documented evidence of the assault, witness statements from his wife about his violent behavior, and a pattern of similar incidents that shows this wasn't isolated. Emma looked up sharply. Similar incidents? Yes, Parker confirmed. Since we started building this case, 3 other women have come forward with similar experiences. They've been afraid to speak up, but they're willing to now. Bear's expression softened as he watched Emma process this information. He could see the mixture of relief and sadness in her eyes. Relief that she wasn't alone. Sadness that others had suffered too. The justice system isn't perfect, Parker continued, but it can work. Your case is strong, Ms. Collins. The evidence is compelling, and more importantly, it's corroborated by multiple sources. But what if, Emma started. We'll fight this together, Bear interrupted gently. Every step of the way. Remember what you told me about wanting to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else? This is your chance. Emma took a deep breath, straightening in her chair. You really think we have a chance? Parker nodded firmly. Yes, I do. It won't be easy, but we have enough to proceed with both criminal charges and a civil suit. McAllister's money and influence will make this an uphill battle, but sometimes those are the ones most worth fighting. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn linoleum floor. Bear wiped down the counter, watching as Emma moved between tables with a fresh pot of coffee. Her smile, he noticed, was genuine today, a small but significant change from the forced cheerfulness of weeks past. A young woman sat alone in a corner booth, absently stirring her untouched coffee. Sarah, Bear remembered her name from the previous week when she'd first walked in, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Today was her 3rd visit. Emma approached Sarah's table, coffee pot in hand. Would you like a refill? She asked softly. Sarah looked up, managing a weak smile. Yes, please. As Emma poured, Sarah's sleeve slipped, revealing familiar marks on her wrist. Their eyes met in silent understanding. I heard about what you're doing, Sarah said quietly. Standing up to Tom McAllister. People are talking about it. Emma set the coffee pot down and slid into the booth across from her. It's not easy, she admitted, but I'm not alone anymore. Throughout the morning, more people filtered in. Some were regulars, but others were new faces drawn by whispered conversations and shared stories. A middle-aged woman who'd left her abusive husband years ago now mentored younger women. A retired counselor offered free advice over pancakes and coffee. Bear watched it all from behind the counter, amazed at how his diner had evolved. What started as a simple restaurant had become something more, a refuge where people felt safe enough to share their stories, to find strength in each other. During the afternoon lull, Claire McAllister herself walked in. The diner fell quiet. She looked different now, stronger, more determined. She'd left Tom 2 weeks ago, and though the bruises had faded, the memory of them still lingered in her eyes. "Emma?" Claire called out, approaching the counter. "I brought those pamphlets from the women's shelter." She pulled a stack of brochures from her bag. "They're willing to help anyone who needs it." Emma arranged the pamphlets near the register, where they could be easily seen, or quietly slipped into a pocket. Bear had watched her grow more confident with each passing day, transforming from someone who hid her own pain to someone who helped others face theirs. The lunch rush brought in construction workers and office employees, but mixed among them were people who came for more than just the food. They came for the knowing glances, the understanding smiles, the quiet conversations in corner booths where stories were shared and healing began. A teenage girl sat with her mother, both of them talking in low voices with one of the regular patrons, a social worker who'd started holding informal support meetings every Tuesday afternoon. In another corner, a man who'd grown up witnessing abuse shared his journey of breaking the cycle with a young father. Bear kept the coffee flowing and the grill running, but he did more than just cook now. Sometimes all people needed was someone to listen without judgment, and Bear had become good at that. His imposing presence, once intimidating, now offered a sense of security to those who needed it most. The diner hummed with quiet conversations and clinking silverware, punctuated by the sizzle of the grill and the gentle whir of the ceiling fans. It wasn't just a place for pancakes and burgers anymore. It had become a sanctuary where broken spirits began to mend, where fear transformed into courage, and where nobody had to face their battles alone. The bell above the diner's door rang violently as Tom McAllister burst in, his face red with rage. The afternoon crowd fell silent, forks freezing mid-bite as the businessman stormed toward the counter. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his usually well-groomed hair was disheveled. "You think you can press charges against me?" Tom's voice boomed through the diner. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Bear moved swiftly from behind the counter, positioning himself between Tom and Emma. His massive frame cast a shadow over the businessman, but Tom was too angry to be intimidated. "This is between me and her," Tom snarled, trying to step around Bear. "No." Bear's voice was calm but firm. "It's not." Emma stood behind Bear, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. The regular customers watched in tense silence, some already reaching for their phones. "You're nothing but a worthless cook," Tom spat at Emma, his words dripping with venom. "Who do you think they'll believe? A respected businessman or some—" "That's enough," Bear's deep voice rumbled. His tattoo-covered arms remained at his sides, but his stance made it clear he wouldn't let Tom take another step closer. Tom's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You're making a big mistake, both of you. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I'll—" "Stop it!" The high-pitched voice cut through Tom's threats like a knife. Max Collins, Emma's 7-year-old son, had emerged from the back room where he usually did his homework after school. His small frame stood straight, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "Leave my mommy alone." Max's voice quivered but held strong. He moved to stand beside Bear, looking up at Tom with fierce determination in his young eyes. Tom blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the child's intervention. "You're a bad man," Max continued, his voice growing stronger. "You hurt my mommy, but she's not scared of you anymore, and neither am I." The diner remained deathly quiet. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she watched her son stand up to her tormentor. "Bear protects us now," Max declared. "And I protect my mommy too. You can't hurt her anymore." Tom's face changed. The rage seemed to drain away, replaced by something else, perhaps shame, or the sudden realization that he was being confronted by the bravery of a child. He looked around the diner, seeing the faces of the regular customers, all witnesses to this moment. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he took a step back. The power he'd wielded through fear and intimidation seemed to evaporate in the face of a 7-year-old's courage. "This isn't over," Tom muttered, but the threat in his voice had weakened considerably. "Yes, it is," Bear said quietly, placing a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. Tom looked at them one last time. The towering ex-biker, the brave little boy, and the woman he'd tried to break. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner, the bell chiming much more softly this time. The courthouse loomed before Emma, its stone steps seeming to stretch endlessly upward. Her hands fidgeted with the button of her freshly pressed blazer, a gift from Claire McAllister, of all people. Bear stood beside her, a steady presence in his uncharacteristic suit and tie. "You ready?" Bear asked softly. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside the courthouse, their footsteps echoed through the marble hallway. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, waited for them outside the courtroom, his weathered face breaking into a reassuring smile. "Good morning," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "We've had some developments. 3 more women have come forward with complaints about Tom's behavior." Emma's eyes widened. 3? "Former employees," Mr. Peterson explained. "They saw the story in the local paper and contacted my office. Their testimonies will help establish a pattern." They entered the courtroom, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. Tom sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller somehow in his expensive suit. Gone was his usual arrogant smirk, replaced by a tightness around his eyes that spoke of worry. The preliminary hearing began, and Emma listened as Mr. Peterson presented their case. Her hands trembled slightly as he described the incident at the diner, but Bear's steady presence beside her helped keep her grounded. When Tom's lawyer stood to speak, something unexpected happened. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and people began filing in quietly. Emma turned to look and felt her heart swell. There were her regular customers from the diner, Mrs. Henderson, who always ordered blueberry pancakes, Mr. Rodriguez, who came in for his morning coffee, and at least a dozen others. Tom noticed, too. His shoulders stiffened as he recognized faces from around town, people he'd encountered in his business dealings, people he'd bullied or threatened over the years. During the recess, Emma stood in the hallway, surrounded by supporters. Mrs. Henderson approached her first, pulling her into a warm hug. "We've all seen how he treated you, dear," she said. "And not just you. My nephew used to work for him. The stories he told me..." She shook her head sadly. Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward next. "My brother's construction company almost went under because of Tom's threats and manipulation. It's time someone stood up to him." One by one, people shared their stories. Some were small incidents of bullying, others were more serious cases of intimidation and threats. Each story seemed to build upon the last, creating a clear picture of Tom's reign of terror over the community. Bear watched from a few steps away, his heart swelling with pride. Emma stood straighter with each person who approached her, her fear gradually being replaced by determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever felt powerless against Tom's influence. Even Claire McAllister made an appearance, though she kept her distance. She caught Bear's eye and gave a small nod, her own way of showing support. When they returned to the courtroom, Tom's lawyer looked distinctly uncomfortable. The gallery was now packed with faces Tom recognized, people he'd wronged over the years, all there to support Emma. As the judge called the hearing back to order, Bear leaned forward slightly in his seat. He could see the change in Tom's demeanor, the way his confidence seemed to crumble under the weight of all those watching eyes. For the first time, Tom McAllister was beginning to understand that his actions had consequences, and his money couldn't protect him from everything. The courtroom doors burst open, and Emma rushed out, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she tried to maintain her composure. Bear followed close behind, his large frame moving surprisingly quick to keep up with her. The morning sun streaming through the courthouse windows seemed to mock the darkness that had settled over them. "Emma, wait," Bear called out, his voice gentle despite its deep rumble. She stopped near a wooden bench, her shoulders trembling. The carefully pressed blazer now looked wrinkled, much like her spirits felt crumpled. Bear caught up to her, standing close enough to shield her from curious onlookers, but far enough to give her space. "I can't believe it," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "How can they just dismiss everything like that?" Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, approached with a grim expression, his briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. "Tom's legal team pulled some strings," he explained. "They're claiming insufficient evidence and character defamation. The judge who was supposed to hear our case was suddenly replaced with Judge Matthews." "Who just happens to be a golfing buddy of Tom's?" Bear growled, his fists clenching at his sides. Emma sank onto the bench, her face pale. "All those people who came forward, all their stories, they just threw them out?" "Not thrown out exactly," Mr. Peterson clarified, adjusting his glasses. "But Judge Matthews ruled that most of the testimonies were hearsay and irrelevant to the current case. He's limiting what we can present in court." Bear watched as Emma's hope, which had been so bright just hours ago, seemed to dim before his eyes. The morning had started with such promise, the courthouse packed with supporters, their case seeming solid. But Tom had played his hand well, using his connections to twist the system in his favor. "He's going to get away with it," Emma said, her voice hollow. "Just like my ex-husband did. Just like they always do." Her hands twisted in her lap, and Bear noticed she was wearing the silver bracelet her son Max had given her for Mother's Day. The courthouse corridor buzzed with activity around them, but they remained in their bubble of defeat. Through the large windows, Bear could see Tom walking to his car, surrounded by his expensive lawyers, a hint of his old smugness returning to his face. "Listen to me, Emma," Bear said, kneeling down to meet her eye level, his knees protesting against the hard floor. "This is just one setback. One judge, one hearing. We're not done fighting." Emma shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "You don't understand, Bear. This is how it starts. First, they question the evidence. Then they start digging into my past, trying to make me look unstable or unreliable. They'll bring up my failed marriage, maybe even try to use Max against me." Bear reached out to take her hand, but Emma pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. He recognized the gesture. She was building her walls back up, retreating into herself just as she had when they first met. "We can appeal, Mr. Peterson offered. There are other legal avenues we can explore." "No," Emma cut him off, standing abruptly. I can't do this anymore. I can't put everyone through this." She looked at Bear, and he saw the familiar fear creeping back into her eyes. "I'm sorry, Bear. I should never have let you convince me this would work." "Emma," Bear started, but she was already walking away, her steps quick and purposeful, leaving him standing there with an ache in his chest and the bitter taste of injustice in his mouth. The evening sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Bear wiped down the counter for the third time, his movements mechanical. The place was empty, except for Emma, who sat in her usual booth, staring blankly at an untouched cup of coffee. Her son Max was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and the silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "You should eat something," Bear said, placing a plate of her favorite apple pie in front of her. Emma pushed the plate away gently. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time for a fresh start. Somewhere else." Bear's hand stilled on the counter. "You're talking about leaving town?" "I've got some savings," Emma continued, as if she hadn't heard him. "Max is young enough that changing schools wouldn't be too hard on him. We could go somewhere where nobody knows us, where Tom can't—" Her voice cracked. Bear slid into the booth across from her, his large frame making the seat creak. "Running won't solve anything, Emma. You've built a life here." "A life?" Emma let out a bitter laugh. "I've built a prison. Every morning I wake up wondering if this will be the day Tom decides to make good on his threats. Every time the bell above the door rings, my heart stops for a second." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't live like this anymore." "The community supports you," Bear reminded her gently. "You saw how many people came forward. And what good did it do?" Emma's voice rose slightly. "Tom's money and connections trump everything. The system's rigged, Bear. It always has been." Bear leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on the table. "Remember Mrs. Henderson? She brings her granddaughter here every Sunday just to see you. And Rick from the hardware store? He banned Tom from his shop the day after he heard what happened." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "They're good people, but good people can't always protect you." "No," Bear agreed, "but they can stand with you. You're not alone in this fight, Emma. Look around." He gestured to the walls of the diner, where photos of regular customers hung. "Every person in these pictures has your back. Sarah from the bookstore has been organizing a boycott of Tom's businesses. The high school principal pulled his account from Tom's bank." A tear rolled down Emma's cheek. "I never asked for any of that." "You didn't have to," Bear said softly. "That's what community means. It's not just about serving coffee and eggs. It's about being there for each other when things get tough." Emma's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I'm tired of being afraid, Bear." "I know." He reached across the table, offering his hand palm up. This time, after a moment's hesitation, Emma took it. "But fear loses its power when you face it with others." "What if it's not enough?" Emma whispered. "What if we can't win?" "Then we'll keep fighting," Bear said firmly. "Together. Not just you and me, but everyone who believes in what's right." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're stronger than you think, Emma, and you've got an entire town's worth of strength behind you." Emma looked down at their joined hands, her small one almost disappearing in his large, calloused palm. For the first time since the courthouse, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but she didn't let go either, and Bear knew she was starting to remember her own strength. The morning air was crisp as Bear opened the diner, the familiar scent of fresh coffee filling the space. He had barely unlocked the front door when Sarah from the bookstore rushed in, clutching a folder to her chest, her gray hair escaping from its usual neat bun. "Bear, you need to see this," she said, spreading papers across the counter. "I've been collecting statements. 10 people came forward yesterday alone." Bear leaned over the documents, his eyes widening as he read. There were handwritten letters, typed statements, and even old photographs showing Tom's pattern of intimidation over the years. "Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop finally spoke up," Sarah continued, pointing to one of the letters. "Remember when her shop nearly went under last year? Turns out Tom had been threatening to buy her building and triple the rent if she didn't sell to him." The bell above the door chimed again. Rick from the hardware store walked in, followed by Principal Matthews and 3 other local business owners. They all carried similar folders. "We've got more," Rick announced, his weathered face determined. "The whole downtown district is talking now. It's like a dam broke." Emma emerged from the kitchen, freezing when she saw the gathering crowd. Her eyes darted to Bear, who gave her an encouraging nod. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Principal Matthews stepped forward. "Evidence, Emma. We've been blind for too long, letting Tom McAllister bully this town. When you stood up to him, it gave others courage." "I didn't do anything special," Emma protested. "You did," Sarah insisted. "You showed us that we don't have to be afraid anymore." Throughout the morning, more people arrived. The diner's regular breakfast crowd mixed with newcomers, all bringing their own stories. Judge Peterson's secretary revealed how Tom had tried to pressure the judge into dismissing various cases. A former employee of Tom's bank described his pattern of denying loans to people who crossed him. Bear watched as Emma moved through the crowd, listening to each person's story. With every conversation, she stood a little straighter, her shoulders squaring with newfound determination. By midday, their lawyer arrived, looking through the mounting evidence with growing excitement. "This changes everything," he said, spreading the documents across a booth. "With this many witnesses coming forward, the pattern of behavior is clear. Tom's influence won't be enough to sweep this under the rug." Emma sat down heavily in a chair, overwhelmed by the support. Bear brought her a cup of tea, setting it gently in front of her. "I never knew," she whispered. "All this time I thought I was alone." "You were never alone," Bear replied. "Sometimes people just need someone brave enough to take the first step." The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It was now the heart of a community finding its voice. People who had barely spoken to each other before were now sharing stories, offering support, and planning ways to stand against Tom's influence. As the afternoon approached, it was time for Emma's court appearance. The crowd of supporters gathered outside the diner, ready to walk with her to the courthouse. Some carried signs, others simply offered quiet words of encouragement. Emma stood at the diner's entrance, taking in the scene before her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm when she spoke. "Thank you, all of you." Bear stepped up beside her, offering his hand. Emma took it, drawing strength from his steady presence and the sea of familiar faces before them. Together, they stepped onto the sidewalk, leading the procession towards the courthouse, surrounded by the unwavering support of their community. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps already crowded with supporters from the community. Emma paused at the bottom, her hand tightening around the strap of her purse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees lining the street. Bear stood beside her, his familiar presence steady and reassuring. He wore a clean, pressed shirt, a far cry from his usual diner attire, and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. Emma noticed his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, though his voice remained gentle when he spoke. "You ready?" he asked. Emma swallowed hard and nodded, though her legs felt like lead. Together, they climbed the courthouse steps, passing through the gathered crowd. Familiar faces smiled encouragingly. Sarah from the bookstore, Rick from hardware, even Mrs. Rodriguez, who had closed her flower shop for the morning to be here. Inside, the courthouse corridors echoed with hushed voices and clicking heels on marble floors. Their lawyer met them outside the courtroom, his briefcase bulging with statements and evidence collected from the community. "The judge will be here soon," he explained, guiding them to their seats. "Remember what we practiced. Just tell the truth, Emma. That's all you need to do." The courtroom filled quickly. Emma's heart pounded as she watched people file in, witnesses, supporters, and curious onlookers. The wooden bench felt hard beneath her, and she shifted uncomfortably, smoothing her skirt for the 100th time. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered to Bear, her voice trembling. "What if no one believes me? What if—" Bear turned to face her, his expression serious. "Emma, look around you." She did. The courtroom was packed with familiar faces, people from the diner, shop owners, teachers, and dozens of others who had come forward with their own stories about Tom. "You've already won," Bear continued softly. "You gave all these people the courage to speak up. Tom can't hurt anyone anymore, not you, not them. Whatever happens today, you've changed things for the better." Emma's eyes welled with tears. "But what if—" "No what ifs," Bear interrupted gently. "You're not alone anymore. You never will be again." From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Tom enter with his lawyers. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she remembered. His usual confident strut was gone, replaced by stiff, uncertain movements. Several people in the gallery turned their backs as he passed. Emma's hands were shaking. Bear noticed and placed his large, calloused hand over hers. "Remember the diner," he said quietly. "Remember how you handled the lunch rush during that big festival last summer? When everything was chaos and orders were piling up?" Despite her nerves, Emma smiled slightly at the memory. "I just took it one ticket at a time?" "Exactly," Bear nodded. "This is no different. One step at a time. Just tell your truth." The bailiff's voice rang out, calling for everyone to rise. As Emma stood, she felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. Bear was right. She'd already won the most important battle by breaking her silence. The judge would be entering any moment now. Emma squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. She caught Tom's eye across the courtroom and held his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. For the first time, it was Tom who broke eye contact first. "Thank you," she whispered to Bear, "for everything." Bear just nodded, his presence beside her as solid and dependable as always. Emma took a deep breath and faced forward, ready to tell her story. The courtroom fell silent as witness after witness took the stand. Emma watched as familiar faces from the community shared their stories. Sarah from the bookstore spoke about the time Tom had cornered her in the parking lot, making threats when she refused to extend his credit. Rick from the hardware store described how Tom had tried to force him to sell his shop through intimidation and harassment. Tom's composure began to slip with each testimony. His perfectly pressed suit seemed to hang more loosely on his frame, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He kept shuffling papers, whispering frantically to his lawyers, his facade of confidence crumbling. When Claire McAllister took the stand, Tom visibly flinched. His wife's hands trembled as she gripped the railing, but her voice remained steady as she detailed years of emotional abuse and manipulation. She described how Tom's affair had sent him into a spiral of drinking and violence, how his need for control had turned into something darker. "He wasn't always like this," Claire testified, her eyes meeting Tom's across the courtroom. "But power corrupted him, and his anger, it consumed everything." Bear sat beside Emma, his presence unwavering. She could feel the tension in his body, but his face remained calm. He had kept his promise. No violence, just support and strength when she needed it most. The prosecution presented evidence next. Photographs of Emma's bruises, security camera footage from the diner showing Tom's aggressive behavior, text messages full of threats and intimidation. Each piece built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of abuse and control. Tom's lawyer attempted to paint his client as a respected businessman under stress, but his arguments felt hollow against the weight of testimony. When he tried to suggest Emma had misinterpreted Tom's actions, angry murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The final blow came when Max's teacher testified about the day he'd found the young boy crying in the school bathroom. terrified that the mean man from the diner would hurt his mother. Tom's face crumpled at this, and for the first time, he looked truly defeated. Emma felt Bear's hand squeeze her shoulder gently. She looked up at him, finding strength in his steady gaze. The fear that had haunted her for so long was still there, but it was different now. Smaller, manageable. When the judge began to speak, the courtroom fell completely silent. His words were measured and clear as he addressed Tom directly, condemning his actions and the way he had abused his position in the community. The judge spoke about the pattern of behavior, the multiple victims, and the need for accountability. "Mr. McAllister," the judge declared, his voice firm, "this court finds substantial evidence of harassment, assault, and systematic abuse. You will be held accountable for your actions." The judge detailed the penalties: significant fines, mandatory counseling, a restraining order protecting Emma and others, and the possibility of jail time pending further investigation into additional charges. Emma closed her eyes as relief flooded through her body. She felt tears rolling down her cheeks. But these were different from the tears of fear she'd shed so many times before. Bear's strong arm wrapped around her shoulders, and she could feel the pride radiating from him. Not pride in himself, but in her strength, her courage to stand up and speak her truth. Around them, the courtroom buzzed with activity, but Emma remained still, allowing herself to fully feel this moment of vindication. Justice had been served, and she was finally free. The morning after the trial, Emma stood in Bear's diner, bathed in golden sunlight streaming through the windows. The familiar scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but everything felt different now. Better. Lighter. Regular customers kept stopping by, not just for their usual orders, but to offer words of support and encouragement. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been coming to the diner for her morning coffee for 15 years, wrapped Emma in a tight hug. "We're all so proud of you, dear," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. Bear watched from behind the counter, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he wiped down the already spotless surface. He'd been quieter than usual, but his eyes never strayed far from Emma, as if making sure she was really okay. Throughout the morning, more people arrived. Sarah from the bookstore brought a care package filled with Emma's favorite novels. Rick from the hardware store stopped by with a handmade wind chime, its gentle tinkling adding a peaceful note to the diner's atmosphere. Even Claire McAllister visited briefly, leaving a heartfelt note of gratitude and apology. Max bounced around the diner with renewed energy, no longer carrying the weight of worry on his small shoulders. He proudly showed everyone his latest art project, a crayon drawing of their diner family, with Bear standing tall beside Emma and himself, all of them wearing big smiles. "Mom," Max called out, tugging at Emma's apron. "Can we have pancakes for dinner tonight? Bear's special ones with the chocolate chips?" Emma laughed, a sound that came easier now. "We'll see, sweetie. Why don't you go help Jerry set up the silverware?" As Max scampered off, Bear approached Emma with a fresh cup of coffee. "You doing okay?" he asked softly, his gruff voice gentle with concern. Emma took the coffee, warming her hands around the mug. "You know what? I really am." She looked around the diner, taking in the familiar faces, the worn but comfortable booths, the sunlight dancing on the chrome fixtures. "For the first time in a long time, I feel safe. Free." Bear nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You did that yourself, Emma. You found your strength." "Not by myself," she corrected him. "I had help. You stood by me when I needed someone most." The day continued with a steady stream of customers and well-wishers. The diner hummed with conversation and laughter, feeling more like a community gathering place than ever before. Emma moved through her tasks with a newfound lightness, no longer looking over her shoulder or flinching at sudden movements. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, the last customers filtered out. Max had fallen asleep in one of the booths, his crayons scattered around him. Emma watched as Bear gently covered him with his jacket, tucking it around the boy's shoulders. They worked in comfortable silence, cleaning up and closing down for the night. The familiar routine felt different now, peaceful rather than anxious, hopeful instead of fearful. Emma wiped down the last table as Bear turned off the grill and stored away the remaining ingredients. The diner was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the clock above the counter. Emma sat at the counter, and Bear poured them both a final cup of coffee. They didn't need words to express what they were feeling: the gratitude, the relief, the sense of possibility that lay ahead. Through the window, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and for the first time in years, Emma found herself looking forward to it with genuine hope. The morning rush had turned into a constant stream of customers, filling the diner with warmth and chatter. Emma moved between tables with a newfound confidence, her smile genuine and bright. The regulars noticed the change in her. She stood taller now, laughed more freely, and her eyes sparkled with a strength that hadn't been there before. Sarah Mitchell, a young woman who worked at the local grocery store, sat at the counter, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to talk to you, Emma," she said quietly when Emma came to refill her cup. "Your story, it gave me courage. I left him last week." Emma's hand steadied the coffee pot. "Are you safe?" Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm staying with my sister. I never thought I could do it until I saw you stand up to Tom." Bear, who had been wiping down the grill, pretended not to listen, but his shoulders tensed at the mention of Tom's name. Emma reached across the counter and squeezed Sarah's hand. "The first step is the hardest. Do you need anything?" "Just this," Sarah gestured around the diner. "A place where I feel safe." Throughout the day, more people came in with similar stories. Some just wanted to sit and soak in the atmosphere of acceptance and strength. Others needed to talk, to share their own experiences. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. It was a sanctuary. Max proudly helped out after school, delivering waters and napkins to tables with careful concentration. He'd grown more outgoing since the trial, chattering with customers and drawing pictures for the regulars. Bear kept a watchful eye on him, occasionally ruffling the boy's hair as he passed by. "You've created something special here," Claire McAllister said during the afternoon lull. She'd become a regular visitor, slowly healing from her own painful past with Tom. "People need this, a place where they can feel understood." Emma watched as Bear showed Max how to properly stack the clean plates, his massive hands gentle as he guided the boy's smaller ones. "We all did," she corrected. "Everyone who spoke up, everyone who supported us, we all made this happen." As evening approached, the dinner crowd filled every booth and counter seat. The kitchen hummed with activity as Bear and Emma worked in perfect sync, their movements coordinated from years of working together. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, more hopeful. The diner had always been a community gathering place, but now it felt like family. When the last customer left and Max was curled up asleep in his usual booth, Bear and Emma sat at the counter together. The coffee was fresh, and the silence was comfortable. Through the windows, they could see the town's main street, where people were still walking by, some waving as they passed. Emma took a sip of her coffee, remembering how different things had been just a few months ago. The fear that had constantly gnawed at her was gone, replaced by a steady sense of peace. She glanced at Bear, who was watching the street with his usual quiet intensity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Bear's weathered face softened into a smile. "You did all the hard work. I just kept the coffee flowing." They sat together, two friends who had become family, surrounded by the life they'd built. The diner's worn surfaces and familiar scents wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow through the windows. Inside, there was only peace, and the quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.